Today I really want to focus on the subject of practical mysticism, but I've been thinking about how I want to do this, and actually over the last couple of days I've been changing my mind and doing things in my mind, how do I want to do this? And so what I'm going to do is, the overall theme is practical mysticism, but I'm going to weave several other things into it to connect to it. So you're going to hear me talk about things like the seventh ray quite a bit, in addition to practical mysticism. We're going to look at the difference between the mystic and the practical mystic. We're going to look at the nature of mysticism as it pertains to a phase in the evolution of human consciousness. And that'll be the first part of our discussion. The main part, though, is that just sets the stage for what I think is the most important aspect of what I want to share with you today. Because I want to share with you something about the creative process. How does the soul try to shape new and progressive ideas within the life of the personality? And how does it utilize all three vehicles of the personality, the mental body, the emotional body, and the physical body, as needed instruments? Because that's a really important concept, that the destiny of every human soul is to be a creative agent on behalf of humanity's upliftment. But that soul, to do that, needs an outer servant to facilitate that. And that outer servant is the personality itself. The destiny of the personality, in the long run, is to be the outer garment used by the soul as an instrument of expression in the outer world. And in many ways, the destiny of every human being is to therefore be a magician. Now, when I use the word magic, I don't mean it in the sense of hocus pocus. I mean it in the sense of that amazing process of how do we take a new and intuitive sense, and how do we create thought forms around it? And what is the physics of that process? And then how do we work it through our system and add the flavors that the personality gives to it as a preparatory process of delivering it into the outer world? And that's the subject of magic. Magic is one of my favorite subjects, and those of you who purchased my book, Shine Forth, there's quite a bit of it in that book as well. So let's begin. Now, I want to first begin by talking about, I'd like to first define something. Yesterday, Kurt did a wonderful job of laying out, remember the three monadic types: first ray, second ray, third ray. And he used the word mystic for the first ray. And in many ways, there's a lot of truth to that, but I want to clarify that as I see it anyway, and that represents an archetypal title for that stream. But often, I'm going to use the word mystic in another way. I want to use it from a rheological perspective, and I want to look at it at the level of the soul, and not so much at the level of the monad. Because when we look at the seven rays, as opposed to the monadic, the threeness of the monad, the ray that is most associated with mysticism is the sixth ray. And you'll see why as we go through this. And while his comments about that are very true in the sense that that first stream, that first logoic stream, can easily be recognized as an archetypal mystic, when we look at it rheologically from the soul level, we want to really understand how the mystic functions through a sixth ray experience. So I'm going to be touching on the rays a bit here too, and the movement into the seventh ray age. Hooray! Okay, see, we must have a seventh ray person here. Okay. All right, so let's begin. So let me first define practical mysticism a bit. And I'll do a compare and contrast. So in a certain sense, practical mysticism, unlike mysticism on its own, has that sense of grounding. And indeed, one of the big differences between the mystic and the practical mystic is that the mystic is very much related to experiencing divinity through the heart and a kind of aspirational urge to unite with the greater life. And on the path of evolution, we will all spend many lives living the life of a mystic and eventually make the transition into the world of practical mysticism. So the mystic believes that the way to find God is through the heart, and that the love of God is the most important divine quality. While the practical mystic believes that the way to God is via the higher mind, and that the mind of God is as sacred as the love of God. Both are needed. So that's a big difference here. The practical mystic integrates the principle of mind, where the mystic favors the heart over the mind. The mystic sees the inner realms of spirit to be the abode of God. Form is viewed as an obstacle to recognizing God within, while the practical mystic knows that both form and formless realms are expression of the one life, God. And matter is spirit at its lowest manifestation, and spirit is matter at its highest expression, a concept that Madame Blavatsky laid strong for us. The service to the mystic is governed by pure heart and compassion. The power of the mind is viewed as secondary. While the practical mystic, service is governed by mind and heart equally. The heart conveys compassion while the mind reasons and directs. Service to the mystic, to humanity, is primarily directed towards suffering and those who live in conditions of helplessness and hopelessness. While the practical mystic, service is directed toward all aspects of human life. Every circumstance and environment is viewed as spiritual and therefore can be aided. So the mystic often is really recognizing that there's suffering in the world, and that's where service is emphasized. Not surprising, for instance, that the Piscean age is a very mystical age, and we have a strong emphasis on service to those most in need. And that doesn't go away, but the practical mystic and the Aquarian quality widen the notion of service to recognize that every place is a place where upliftment and service can be rendered. The mystic tends to see the divine ideal and yearns for humanity to conform to it without delay, while the practical mystic sees the ideal but realizes that evolution is incremental and that achieving the ideal necessarily unfolds over time. Keyword incremental kind of reminds me of what we were told earlier today, in the sense that the idea was that the next step is so important, the next step. Mystic loves humanity but favors an aesthetic and isolative attitude toward the complexities of civilized life. The practical mystic loves humanity while seeking to participate in civilization and the complexities of human life. One way to look at this is the sixth ray and the mystical experience. It occurs it only begins when you have your first awakening to the soul itself. And because it's so heart-oriented, and there's a real striving to find deeper, loving connection with the greater life, the mystic will often believe that the way to do that is to go into isolation and remove themselves from the outer world, the flesh, and the devil, and find safety and peace in that place. And indeed, it's the mystic and the sixth ray age that has led over the centuries to the rise of a tendency in theology toward a cloistered approach. You know, the nuns who go behind the convent walls, where they can free themselves from the world, the flesh, and the devil, and find contemplative rapport in the safety of that quiet, isolated area. And that's important. That's an actual necessary step in the evolution of consciousness. In the Tibetan, the master Tibetan speaks of that phase as being the phase that develops the nursery of the human soul, the nursery. It's kind of by analogy. It's kind of like, think of a mother who has a newborn child. that newborn child, that mother is going to protect that newborn child in its crib, protect it from anything that is going to potentially disrupt that child's development. By analogy, that's what the Piscean age had a lot to do with, as well as the sixth ray. It needs to create isolation to facilitate the growth of that infant soul, so to speak. But now we're moving into an Aquarian age, and we've had 2,000 years of a sixth ray and Piscean era. And the hope is maybe now it's time to leave the nursery and recognize that the world out there is not the source of evil or negativity, that the world is actually, every social institution is an entity. Every social institution has a soul and a personality. Every social institution is a category of human consciousness evolving over the vastness of time. And that it's a sense of, I'm now able to go into the world, into culture, into civilization, and make that grounded, practical application that supports the upliftment of something beyond myself. And that's what the practical mystic is about. The mystic sees the universe and all that it contains as God's creation, while the practical mystic sees the universe and all that it contains as God manifested in and as creation. Big difference, friends, huge difference. The mystic tends to feel a gulf, that there's a God and a creation and a gulf between, and the mystic yearns to find a way of bridging that gulf. The practical mystic says there is no real gulf, there is no real disconnect, because it's the one life manifesting as creation. It's the one becoming the many. So that's a big shift. And I think I mentioned it the other day that in the ultimate sense, you are the divinity you seek. And the practical mystic knows that, while the mystic still holds that sense that there's a God out there, remote and difficult to connect with, and here I am, and I yearn to find ways of bridging that gulf. The mystic tends to interpret events in terms of good and evil, right and wrong, while the practical mystic sees all events as expressions of both darkness and light in differing proportions. And I remember I told you the story about my experience with the woman that jumped up and said, "Do you believe in the Antichrist?" It's the same concept, friends. It's the same concept, okay? So let's talk more about the practical mystic. The practical mystic is a person that is committed to bringing spirituality both intelligently and lovingly into outer manifestation. He or she is somebody that is committed to incrementally moving things forward. And so a practical mystic is much better at managing time and how they move in time with their service as opposed to the mystic. As was mentioned in a previous presentation, the practical mystic is incremental, where the mystic is in a hurry. It's like they want enlightenment now, right? They want enlightenment now. And in a certain sense, this is, I think, what is the challenge. It is said that in the writings we're told that the mystic and the person with a lot of sixth ray in them, one of the challenges they have has to do with the time equation and how to relate to service and understand it within the context of wise utilization of time. Okay? So, and all of this ties into the subject of the seventh ray, because the seventh ray is also called the ray of the practical mystic. And as I said the other day, it is believed that we are moving from a sixth ray age to a seventh ray age. We are moving from the age of the mystic to the age of the practical mystic. And the seventh ray is a grounding ray. In fact, the seventh ray rules the seventh plane. All of you are familiar with the seven planes of consciousness? Well, rays have energetic relationship to the plane number. The seventh plane is the physical, the etheric physical. And the seventh ray is the fundamental energy underlying that physical, while the sixth ray was related to the sixth plane, and that's the emotional plane, the astral plane. And so much of the deeper spiritual truths that have been occurring in the past have their deepest, most obvious level of penetration is down to the emotional level, but not as effective in getting it into the physical, practical. So now the realization is, let's take those deep intuitive insights that the sixth ray had given us and push it one level down further. And the seventh ray helps us do that. Seventh ray helps us do that. You know, the seventh ray is interesting because it's a ray that actually is all about bringing the high into the low. It's all about manifesting heaven on earth. You could say it that way, heaven on earth. You know, all the seven rays have what are called the keynotes, and they're actually like mantras. And in fact, if any of you ever studied the rays, you'll know that one of the ways of a few ways where you get a better handle on your own personal ray is to get acquainted with the keynotes of the signs. They're like mantras that, when chanted in meditation, you will find over time that if you play with each one of them, soon you will realize that there's one or two that are going to become more, somehow you feel more connected to it. And that's one of the clues to what's your soul ray and maybe what's your personality ray. But the mantra for the seventh ray is this: may the highest and lowest meet. May the highest and lowest meet. May the highest thing that you can sense within you, the subtlest, wisest thing you can sense within you, may that meet the lowest point, and that would be the physical. So we are definitely moving into a much more grounded approach to spirituality. And even though you may personally not have, you may not have much seventh ray in your own constitution, that's not important. If you have it in your constitution, it comes a little easier for you. But the seventh ray is an age. We are told that the seventh ray began its externalization or emphasis in the year 1675. While we are given to understand in the year 1625, that's when the sixth ray began its abstraction. And when I say abstraction, they're all present. All the rays are present. But there are great cycles of time where a particular ray is said to be kind of the overriding, emphasized ray, and often for many, many centuries. And so we are kind of, even though we think that 1675, that seems like a long time ago, the truth is it's still in the very early phases, the very early phases. And so the seventh ray is going to play and get stronger and stronger over time. And whether you have the seventh ray in you or not, you want to take advantage of it, because it's going to make you much more effective in your work, much more effective, because you'll be able to be much more able to make it real and externalize that wisdom. You see, your causal body is the storehouse of all the wisdom that you have gained over countless incarnations. And that causal body is supported by a great angelic life, a great deva. And that deva has many names. It's often called the solar angel, and there's a whole reason why it's called the solar angel. But it's also called the Manasaputra. It's also called the mind-born son of God. And that Devic life is going to be also taking advantage of the seventh ray coming forward. See, your causal body is so important because it's holding not only that storehouse of wisdom, but it also holds the quality of Christ-like love. It's really interesting that those are the two qualities of your soul nature. that are held within that causal body. And as I said the other day, the causal body is what moves from one incarnation to the next, to the next, to the next. And every life, you should have acquired more wisdom and more experience that's translated into wisdom, and it's stored in the causal body as new wise faculty. And there's a fascinating discussion of how that happens. How does experience in life actually get translated into the causal body as wisdom? And the beauty of that is that no two people, none of us, have the same content in our causal body, because none of us have had exactly the same lessons and experiences over the vastness of countless incarnations. We haven't had the same. So your causal body has some very unique wisdom contained within it. That's why it's called the treasury sometimes. Sometimes the causal body is called the repository. And that wisdom, its destiny is to be brought forward into the world. Its destiny is to find a way of carrying that wisdom into the world as a function of service. You see, the soul is governed by many laws. There are 5 operative laws and 2 that are dormant for the distant future. And the 3rd law is called the law of service. Every human soul wants to work through the personality to express that wisdom as a function of uplifting potential for others. And the 7th ray is going to make it easier for the soul to do that, because the 7th ray helps that pushing down into the whole of your system, But also the causal body, the substance of it. And by the way, the substance of the causal body is the deva, is the solar angel. If I were to describe that a little bit for you, let me put it this way. We're given to understand that the solar angel that is enshrouding you right now, that solar angel is giving a part of its nature to you. Put it another way. Let's talk about just briefly what is deva. What is deva? And deva is hierarchical. And the deva that is overshadowing you is an extremely evolved entity. You know, it is said that the angelic or devic line is a parallel line of evolution to the human line. And they actually facilitate each other's evolution. But the deva that is overshadowing you and providing you a part of itself is said to be a 6th to 7th degree initiate on the deva line. And I'll give you perspective on that. The parallel to that level of evolution on the human line is the Christ and the Buddha. In other words, the Christ and the Buddha are 7th degree initiates. So you have a deva that in its realm is on par with those great lives that we're referencing. How's that for having a good friend? Good friend. But so that you understand it, at the time of individualization, which happened in the middle of the age of Lemuria, approximately, they say, 18 to 21 million years ago, you as a monad rose out of the animal domain. And as you rose out of the animal domain, there's a whole mythology about the so-called coming of the solar angels, or the solar deva. And that a great angelic life came to support your monad, because your monad had traveled through the animal kingdom for countless millions of years. And before that, the plant kingdom. And before that, even the mineral kingdom. At one time, we were all Rolling Stones, you know. And Mick Jagger would have been proud. And it provided you a sheath that is called the causal body. A sheath. of high-level intelligent substance. But what is that in substance? You see, what is the angelic line anyway? The angelic line represents the full intelligence of the one life, or the logos, let us say, the intelligent side, and that every aspect of your experience has angelic life related to it. At the level of the causal body, the angelic life that is supporting you is this solar angel, and it's giving a part of itself to be your causal body. In other words, your causal body is made of some of the substance of the solar angel. It's as if, I'm going to pretend this is ridiculous, but let's say I'm that solar angel. A totally ridiculous concept, but let's pretend, okay? And I, as the solar angel, am forced to attend to that infant human being, that monad that's just struggling to come out of the animal domain. And there's a whole mythology about why the solar angel is forced. That's another talk altogether. But it's as if I'm that solar angel, and my whole system is the intelligence of my nature, it's as if I'm giving my fingertip and enshrouding that fingertip of intelligent substance, and that becomes that causal body. And that little human being has this incredible deva overshadowing it, providing an aspect of itself, so that you have this high-level intelligent substance available to you to first individualize as a human being, because you can't really develop individualized consciousness unless you have an individualized causal body, unlike the animal kingdom that has a collective causal body. But it also is the very thing that toward the end of the human journey, the end of the journey through the fourth kingdom, the human, is what opens you up onto the path and draws you back to the source. So this solar angel is incredibly important. And so for countless incarnations, that solar angel is said to be just there waiting. There's a reference somewhere where it says, kind of what's it doing otherwise? Apparently it's involved in something called interplanetary telepathy, whatever that is. So then, at a certain point, suddenly, that little human being has developed its soul, its personality well enough and ready enough that it awakens for the first time to the soul, which is to say, it is awakened to the solar angel for the first time. After 18 million years, give or take a couple. And you kind of think, what is the solar angel thinking about that? It's probably going, it's about time, But that solar angel is now recognizing that it's been discovered. And from that point on, that solar angel is going to put more attention on that little fingertip. And you get what is called the beginning of the downward gazing soul. The beginning phase of the downward gazing soul, where that solar angelic life is going to begin to attend its consciousness toward that fingertip to now be supportive more consciously of that little human being. And that's what we call the awakening. And that is the beginning, that's the beginning of the mystical life. That's the beginning of the mystical life. Now, when that awakening occurs, it's often fleeting at first. It comes and goes. But the individual, the human being that's had this experience, they know something radical has happened inside them. They recognize for the first time that there's something sacred deep inside them. Prior to that, their spiritual life is there, but it's much more dependent upon religious systems. Prior to the awakening, an individual will spend countless incarnations and sees death and looks at death and says, that doesn't look good. That doesn't look good. So that they want to find a solution to that discomfort. In fact, Freud used to call it the existential dilemma. And so what is provided for that? Religious institutions. The main function of religion is to provide assurance that there is an afterlife and that you have an eternal quality to you. Oftentimes religion has certain conditions placed upon that, but nonetheless it's that idea. And up until the awakening, the individual will tend to rely solely on religion, and deep down they're thinking, I hope the priest is right. But now you've had an awakening for the first time. And we're given to understand that the individual will begin, because it's only fleeting, it comes and goes, life is never the same from that point forward. Because a seed of awareness has been planted deep within the recesses of his or her consciousness. And that leads them to want to find a way of recapturing that experience. And that's the mystical process. I want to find something that makes me feel like I'm connected again. And they usually go one of two routes. They usually go the route of orthodoxy. And so most serious Orthodox practitioners, where they're talking about born-again Christians or Orthodox Jewish practitioners or Hare Krishna practitioners or Islamic orthodoxy, those are actually indications of the very beginnings of an awakening process. So a lot of people go that way. Other people go the way of what I call the New Age smorgasbord shopping approach. You know that one? Let's go to this workshop. Nope, it didn't reoccur there. Well, let's go to this workshop. Nope, it didn't reoccur there. So there's a jumping around, looking for things. You know, the Tibetan calls it the journey of futility, the jumping around. But either way, nothing's the same. So let me show you another graphic. Now this is a graphic that I use in many of my subjects. This is one of the most important graphics to me that help understand the journey. So what we have here is stages of soul infusion. So when I talked about the idea that the awakening is the beginning of the mystical path, that's here, the aspirant. We have three divisions here. We have the aspirant, the disciple, and the initiate. And the whole aspect of this is that it's trying to show us the relationship between your higher and lower nature. The awakening occurs here. For the first time, the personality, the lower self, has had a conscious experience of the soul deep within, and it feels Christ-like. But as I said, it's fleeting. There's no soul infusion yet, but there is a recognition of the soul. And it's the beginning of what is often called the probationary path, which is equivalent to the process of mystical yearning. And that journey to take you to the second phase can take several lifetimes. But most of the work that people like you are involved with, and the people that I deal with, are in the middle column in their evolution. Because it's one thing to awaken, but then there's this whole process of soul personality fusion that takes place. And so what tries to happen here, maybe you can see me here, what tries to happen is that the soul, after the awakening, the soul is trying to infuse itself into the personality to transform that personality into a useful instrument on its behalf. With me? And that soul infusion process takes several lives to complete. And what happens is the soul begins to infuse itself, and the whole subject of initiation, which is another big subject in this philosophy, is really based upon the measure of personality soul infusion that has been achieved. Okay? Now sometimes, so here, this is what we call the disciple. Partial infusion, commitment to the soul, and we call it the path of discipleship. Now, the path of discipleship is the word discipleship is interesting. There is great masters that one is definitely considered connected to a disciple. But you know, in this context, it's all about learning to be a disciple of your own soul, to be a disciple of your own higher promptings. That's discipleship as well. You know, it has been said that the most important master to first follow is often the one least followed. And that's your own soul, your own higher nature. So this is the process of soul-personality fusion. Keep in mind that sometimes in the literature you'll hear about what is called the dual life of the disciple. The dual life of the disciple. What that really means is that when you're on the path, part of the personality is infused by the soul and part is not. The soul-infused part of your personality is the part of your personality that says, you know, I sense that deeper truth. I sense something intuitively important. It's something that's trying to speak to me. And you know what? I'm going to trust it. I think it's right. And then you have the lower part, the non-infused part of the personality, and that's the part that says, no way. Let ambition rule and the door stand wide. Or it says, I'm not ready. So, in a certain sense, the seventh ray is the ray that helps facilitate this in a more readied fashion. Because may the highest and lowest meet. Remember? May the highest and lowest meet. Now, normally when we discuss this, we talk about how the three parts of the personality are in the game. There's the mental body, the emotional body, and the physical body, okay? And each of those vehicles, the soul is going to want to transform. And in this phase, this is just symbolic of the soul now able to take dominion over the appetites of the physical instrument. It has a lot of correlation to what we call the first initiation. This one has a lot of correlation to the second initiation, where now you become masterful of your emotional nature. And this one here is where you move into initiate life. Full infusion, recognition of the monad, and the path of initiation. So, in other words, this is what we're all trying to do. We're all slowly trying to transform the lower so that it becomes more cooperative with the impulses of the higher. Everybody with me still? You tracking this? Okay. And when that duality, when this duality is finally resolved into a full fusion, that's when, for the first time, for the very first time, inwardly, deep inside, you have your first conscious recognition of the monad. First conscious recognition of it. Because what happens is the duality here, when it's finally resolved here, then you realize that's a lower pole to a yet higher duality. So this duality has to be fully resolved before that deeper part of you, what we call the monad, can be consciously registered. The monad is there all along, but it's not consciously registered. So you could say it this way, that at this phase down here, the aspirant who's awakening, they're awakening in a fleeting way to the soul. But here, it's the soul-infused personality awakening to the monad for the first time. See? And the seventh ray is going to facilitate this even more. Let's talk a little bit more about the seventh ray's influence when it comes to this, because in many ways, this whole journey from here to here is what we mean by the mystical path. That's the mystical path. From here forward, that's the beginning phases of the practical mystic. The practical mystic, okay? And in other words, stated differently, it's only when you start having true soul personality fusion that the system is able to recognize that both the mind and the heart are important sacred qualities to be brought forward as a function of practical service. Prior to that, from here to here, the emphasis is on the heart and aspiration, and I want to feel God more. Much of the New Age movement is in this stretch. They often think they're way over here, but they're actually right here. They often think that they're at the end of the journey, when in a way they're just at the beginning of the journey.
When I read about true mystics,
Yeah.
they talk about the ecstatic experience of becoming one. Would you call that the initiation stage or the initiate?
So we have the irony of this is that a lot of times in culture, what historically some people have been called mystics are actually practical mystics. It's just, the truth is, it's just a definition. And the word mystic can be defined in many ways. Like, for instance, what I'm doing is I'm trying to show you that the word mystic is actually an inescapable part of the journey. That you will, everyone eventually will go through the phase of mystical development before they become the practical mystic. Now, so in a certain sense, if you're talking about the ecstasies of recognizing oneness, true oneness is only when you're going to start to sense the monad in the truest sense. That would be, that person you're calling a mystic is actually a practical mystic. You see what I'm saying? So it's a tricky word because we can use it in different ways. We can use it in different ways.
Somewhere, I believe, Meader says that initiation entails kind of awareness of a point of light somewhere overhead. Would you relate that to the monad?
Yes and no. By the way, that's the best answer to any question. You need to know that. You need to know that. Yes and no. To the disciple, no, it's the causal body, it's the soul. But to the initiate, it's the monad. Okay? So always the light in front of you it's a moving target, according to where you are in the path.
William, prior to the soul infusion with the personality, you said there was a sense of the higher powers. When you have the full infusion and you move to the initiate stage,
Yeah.
what then are you sensing? Because you've already infused the soul and those higher powers. So what does that feel like, or what is that sense now of monad?
Oh, okay. You guys want another drama? You up for a drama? Let's do a drama about that. All right. Put the chair out of here. But this is not a burning ground drama. This is another drama. All right. So imagine that right here is the causal body. And how to put this? Okay, so the causal body's there, and let's say that I'm just waking up on the path. I'm just not even on the path yet. I'm just a young human being just coming, individualizing millions of years ago, okay? So as I develop, if that's the causal body, and I can't do this drama with this little stage, but if I were several miles away, and I'm moving inwardly toward that causal body, I'm doing it like this. And every step is an incarnation. And I'm miles away. Okay? Now, as I finally get to this platform, I'm at a place where I'm starting to go into the aura inwardly of the causal body. Ta-da! The awakening. Okay? As I get to here, I'm getting inwardly closer. My personality is becoming more polarized, closer to the proximity of the causal body deep inside. And what happens is, I'm now able to say, let's say that I have a problem. Let's say that I have something going on in the world. Well, I've now found that causal body. I know how to go inside to find the place where there's the wisdom I sense. And so I can go inside myself and find the answers. So it's like, if I'm here, there's the causal body, a couple steps in, boom, I'm in the library. This is the library. Remember, this is the accumulation of all the wisdom you've earned. It's like a library with books. Books of wisdom. But the thing is, the difference between that library and a real library is that that library has only one author, you. Okay? So you go, it's like as you approach this phase, it's like I can go inside, there's the answer, there's that book. Ah, got it. Now I know how to handle this, solve the problem. Okay? This phase, I'm now standing inwardly, meaning that we call it the place of polarized consciousness. Where is your polarized consciousness? If your polarized consciousness is at this phase, you're very close to the causal body in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day awareness. So you're much closer inwardly. Now it's just like, open the door, just 1 foot in. Where's that book? Ah, got it. So you have easier access to the wisdom stored within. But at this phase, I'm living in the causal body. I'm polarized there. I'm always there. And then what happens? It's a strange thing happens. I'm in that library, and there are levels, I'm on the top floor of the library one day, and I'm not only on the top floor, but I happen to be in the stacks. And I decide that I want to take a look at the books at the top of the stack. And the higher the books, the higher the stacks, the greater the wisdom I've stored in there. And I'm on the top floor. And I'm on the top of the ladder at the stack. And the ceiling of the library is above me. And all of a sudden, while there, the ceiling rips open. And I look up, and there's like a blazing sun of power that's right there in front of me. And it's the awakening to the monad. And it's so powerful that it is said that at that point, the initiate experiences utter joy and utter terror simultaneously. It's so powerful. It's like you recognize an atomic bomb deep inside you, inches from your nose. And then the curtain closes. And the personality goes, holy shit, what was that? But the point is, you had your first glimpse of the monad, just like way back earlier, the aspirant had the first glimpse of the soul. That's what the monad is about. The monad is so powerful. It is archetypally, all of whether it's first ray, second ray, third ray, archetypally, it is power, will. There's monads of will, as was wisely presented to us yesterday. There are monads of love, and there are monads of intelligent activity. But collectively, they're all rooted in divine will. And there's a whole different regime of evolution that takes place from here to get you back to the monad. You go back to the monad, and you will, and now you're a full-fledged master. You're a full-fledged master.
A question from online. Does the solar angel leave us at some point?
Yeah, okay, good question. I didn't know I was going to go this far into this, okay. Yes, there's a point after this, sorry, and let me get the pointer. So after this phase, as there's a movement up here, as you move up here, there's a place that is referred to as we call it the fourth initiation, but it's also called the crucifixion. By the way, this is referred to as the transfiguration, whereas the fourth step is called the crucifixion. And what happens between those phases, between the third and fourth, is that eventually you're moving, you know now about the monad, and you're fully aware of it, and your consciousness is being deeply penetrating into that higher realm toward the monad. And just what happens is that just as you approach and are ready for the fourth initiation, suddenly the light of the monad disappears. Gone. And at that point, you have no karma left within your system. All personally generated karma has been transformed by that time. And so there's nothing that pulls you back into incarnation, because that's the only reason that you are forced to return, because there's still karma within the system that has to be transformed. Think of karma as simply dissonance that has not yet been adjusted to harmonize with the greater system. Okay? So there's no pull back into incarnation. And the light of the monad, which was blazing bright, and now you're fully conscious of it, steady, no longer flickering, and that light goes out. And you are then have to go through the destruction of the causal body. The fourth initiation is the destruction of the causal body. Now I know that sounds weird. You might ask, so why is that? Why would the causal body, the great container that's holding all the wisdom that you've acquired over countless incarnations, why would that, of all things, be destroyed? After all, that's the place where we inwardly assumed would be our place of eternity. Why would that be destroyed? Well, the answer is this. Your causal body is often depicted as a 12-petal lotus. And there's a whole science of how the petals open. And each petal of your causal body is a type of divine intelligence. And it's a fascinating study of the petals of the lotus and what they do. If a petal is open, it means that that particular soulful quality is now able to express itself through the personality without distortion and is unencumbered. And when all the petals are completely open, that's enlightenment, okay? And in the middle of that, causal body, the 12 petals, is what is called the jewel in the lotus, also called the monad. Also called the monad. The jewel in the lotus of the causal body is the monad. And these petals are tiered. So the outer tier of petals are called the knowledge petals. The next tier are called the love petals. The next tier in are called the sacrifice petals. And the final tier are called the synthesis petals. The synthesis petals. And when you're moving from this place, the transfiguration, to the eventual crucifixion, those synthesis petals are starting to open, which means that all the wisdom that has been stored over countless incarnations, that wisdom is now being synthesized into the very fabric of your monadic beingness. You see, because the causal body is still a form, and everything in the causal body you've earned. The wisdom, it's still a form, a high-level form, no question about it. But the essence of all that wisdom becomes synthesized in the causal body as a part of your monadic beingness. Therefore, you don't need the causal body anymore. But it's a strange process because it's called the crucifixion. You know, you think about this in Christianity, what is the crucifixion? You know, Jesus is said to have taken the fourth initiation on the cross, the crucifixion. But in a way, we all have to go through a crucifixion. But what is the causal body? The Christ in you. And it's the body. The body of the Christ in you will be crucified. The story of Jesus on the cross, it's the body of the Christ that was crucified in order to support the resurrection. It's the same idea. And remember in the biblical story, how Jesus is on the cross and he feels abandoned and he says, "Father, Father, why have thou forsaken me?" Let's translate that in occult language. Monad, monad, why have thou forsaken me? It's exactly the same thing, because the monad is the Father in you. The monad is the God in you. It's not just the God in you, but it's the God as you. And then when the causal body is destroyed, and it's destroyed in different ways, what's destroyed is it's not the solar angel that's being destroyed. What's being destroyed is the cohesion that's holding the intelligent substance of the causal body so that it can be let loose and eventually pull away. At the fourth initiation, the cohesion is destroyed, and by the fifth initiation, the solar angel is abstracted itself and returning back to its source. And therefore the fifth initiation is often called the resurrection.
I think you answered my question with the stacked library, because the way I see the causal body or the soul is when we have our very first incarnation, it's like a CD that's completely empty. And then in each life, we add experience.
Yeah.
And so at the beginning, the solar angel doesn't even have a chance because we can't connect, right? Because we don't have enough experience, correct?
Right.
Okay, good. And then you say it was a stacks of books, like at the beginning, the first
no books.
initiation.
It was an empty
There are no
library.
book, exactly.
Empty
So
library.
it's like for me, you have the books, I have the CD. Okay, I just want to make sure I have that right.
Look, for the first, when you individualized, and this is my own speculation, but you're not suddenly this intelligent human being. I guarantee you, when after we individualized, we were probably grunting for several incarnations. I just think so. Okay? But by now, and see, what this is all about, friends, and this is what your story is, whether you realize it or not, this whole transition process, which is going to be facilitated in a much more effective way through the incoming seventh ray and your capacity to be more effective as a practical mystic, that what this is really about is stepping into the next kingdom of nature. That's what initiation is really only about. It's a stepping process from life lived in the human kingdom, which is the fourth kingdom of nature, to life lived in the fifth kingdom of nature, which is the kingdom of the soul, which is where the masters are also found. You see? And in a certain sense, another little drama here, okay? How do I do this here? I need a line here. Let's say that, for instance, this line is, this is the edge between the human kingdom, the fourth kingdom over here, and the fifth kingdom, where we're moving, over there. So I'll just dramatize that, all right? So here I am. First initiation, 1 foot in. Second initiation, I've got stride. Third initiation, both feet are in, but I'm leaning against the door. Fourth initiation, I'm free. I'm free. Just a very simple way of understanding what's really going on. You may not realize it, but you're on a journey to enter into a new kingdom of nature.
I'm wondering, this may not be in the realm of your talk, but I look into the awakenings that I've had, which have been several. And the first one I was really by myself. But the other major awakenings I've had have really been after being in interaction with a guru or what we might think of as a spiritual master or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have these great awakenings after being with them. And how does that fit in a spiritual teacher that maybe ameliorates the karma or helps you advance or something like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I can't answer that with great clarity because that's a whole different presentation. But let me just say this, that in the esoteric philosophy, there's a whole study of what are called the 2 tracks of understanding the journey to final enlightenment. 2 tracks. One of them, which is what I'm talking a little bit about here, although I didn't intend to talk about initiation this much, but one of them is initiation. And initiation is really just about demonstrated mastery over some measure of your personality, and how does the consciousness change as a result of that. Someday I'll do a whole thing for you folks if you want to do a whole thing on initiation. I've got a whole 2-day seminar on that subject alone. But but each initiation is transforming you and perfecting your relationship with your outer garment of personality. And and when you study initiation, you're looking at what part of the personality is in the process of being transformed primarily, physical, emotional, mental, but also it's also saying something about the measure of responsibility that you have at each initiatory opportunity in terms of service to humanity, you see? Whereas the other track has been called the 6 stages of discipleship. Now that's not a measure of initiate process, that's a measure of intimacy with the ashram. Intimacy with the ashram. Now let me refresh your memory. I think I might have mentioned this in the talk, I can't remember. You know, the word ashram means spiritual home, right? But usually when we hear the word ashram, we think of someplace in India. You know, and got to go to India, find the guru, that sort of thing. And no criticism, but that's fine, that's good. There's a lot of value to that. But I have to tell you, that's not the ashram. The ashram is not in India. And dare I say, it's not in Wheaton either. Okay. Where is it? It's deep inside you, deep inside. The base of the ashram is found on the Buddhic plane, the Buddhic plane. That's where the masters are found. That's where, when you take the 4th initiation, you live on the Buddhic plane. And we had some wonderful insights given to us this morning about the Buddhic plane from this amazing disciple right here anyway. But so I'm going to talk more about the Buddhic plane for you. We're right in sync with it. But the thing is this, is that that's where we can talk about being inspired by a guru or a master, because the stages are this, if I can remember the names of them. The first stage is called the stage of little chela, the little chela. Chela is another word for disciple. The chela in the light is the next phase. Accepted discipleship is the next stage. The next stage is called the chela on the thread, chela in the master's heart. These are measures of intimacy, meaning inwardly how how sensitive are you to the promptings, the intuitive promptings coming from the ashram. And so, and there is a parallel process between the study of initiation and the stages of intimacy with the ashram. And when I do, that's a whole separate thing too, and I can parallel them to show you how they interface with each other. But there is a stage where you are particularly influenced by another teacher, another spiritual influence that enlivens you and helps you on your way in terms of intimacy. In other words, the master works through a person in the outer world that is trying to facilitate and help you on your journey. So most of us will have some kind of experiences like you as well.
How many of these transfigured initiates are physically living on the earth today? How common or rare is this?
At this level here, not many, but let's put it this way. This is a transfigured disciple, therefore an initiate. An initiate is somebody that has another name. They're sometimes called the world disciple. Now, do you remember me saying world disciple before? I talked about the world disciple, and I said in my talk, I said that's another name for the new group of world servers, of which you are all part of it. The term world disciple has 2 applications. It means the new group of world servers as a totality, as one entity, and it's also coincidentally a title for a 3rd degree initiate, and they're called a world disciple. But why? It's because at this level, it means that your work in the world will have global implications in service to humanity, either in the life or as a legacy to the life. Alice Bailey was a 3rd degree initiate, and Helena Blavatsky was a 4th degree initiate. She was a 4th degree initiate. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Very few, very few. I remember, I can speculate on some people. You know, people like Abraham Lincoln would have been an initiate. So would have Nelson Mandela, somebody like Mahatma Gandhi, It depends. They will play out in different ways, because remember, you're part of an ashram, but you're part of a ray ashram. So, for instance, Nelson Mandela would be a second-ray soul. So would Mahatma Gandhi, although he could have been a sixth-ray soul. That's possible. Whereas a person like many people that study this deeply, we study biographies and try to correlate what we can learn about a person historically. A person that we think, like Mikhail Gorbachev, was probably an initiate, but along the first-ray line. The first-ray line is much more governing politics and governance and that sort of thing. So, as strange as it might sound, a person like Mikhail Gorbachev, or even an Abraham Lincoln, but Mikhail Gorbachev and a sort of Nelson Mandela are actually about the same place in evolution, and yet coming from different ashramic streams, and therefore would seem to be quite different. But that's the beauty of this philosophy, is that you've got initiates coming out of each of the ashrams, and they attend to the world in totally different ways. So a first-ray individual, when they're on the path, is much more likely to find their service in the world through governance. The whole department of government, that's what the masters call it, the department of government, is a first-ray manifestation. And first-ray souls are more likely to navigate themselves towards service in that department. That's a very important concept, friends. Whatever your soul ray is, that there will be institutional settings in the world that vibrate to the same note, the same ray, and you, without knowing it, unconsciously, or maybe consciously, you find yourself gravitating toward that which is consistent with your own ray nature. So it's a really interesting study in its own right. Okay. I'm going to go on to something else, but there's a couple quick things I want to say about that need to be said here too. And some of this will reference back to what Kurt's wonderful presentation earlier. But I want to highlight just a fundamental perceptual principle. See, in this philosophy, these three structures are called the personality, the soul, and the monad. They're called the three periodical vehicles. And they each represent a place in the journey of evolution where life looks out and says, I am this. So before you're on the path, all of consciousness only says, I am this. Whereas once you're waking up to the soul, more and more, you're starting to recognize that this is who you are. The soul is who you are. And then finally, the day will eventually come when I am this, okay? But each of these structures are conditioned by different principles. So for instance, the personality, the lower self, it's fundamental, it's said to be governed by the principle of separateness. In other words, the lower self, as governed by the principle of separateness, it has a vested interest in seeing how it's different than another. And that's how ego develops. And it becomes through contrast with another. Or it can also, that tendency can create envy as well, okay? So the personality, before it's redeemed, before any redemption of it is occurring, it's governed by the principle of separateness. The soul, on the other hand, is governed by the principle of unity. And the monad is governed by the principle of synthesis. Synthesis. So separateness goes to unity, goes to synthesis. Dramatized this way, for countless incarnations, the whole nature of consciousness is separative. I'm different than you. Then you move into a long period of disciplic life where you're cultivating unitive consciousness. And in the end, you move into the field of synthetic consciousness or synthesis. And so, looked at in another way, we can talk about it in terms of, for instance, when you're in the field of separateness, I'm different than you. When you really live in the soul life, I see myself in you. When you're living the monad, I am you, and you are me. That's synthesis. That's synthesis. And the same is true when we look at the drama between heart and head. At the personality level, love and mind are in conflict. They don't get along. Love At the level of the personality, love looks at mind and says, you're dangerous. Mind looks at love and says, you're impotent, powerless. At the level of the soul, they realize, oh, we need each other. We need each other. And that's why the soul is both an agency of mind and love. It's found on the higher mental plane, that's where the causal body is, but it's also naturally Christ-like. Well, and on the level of the monad, they're fused as one. There's no difference. This is why the Buddhic plane has other names. It's mostly called the Buddhic plane, and yet it's also been called the plane of Christ. And it's also called the plane of pure reason. Pure reason. So it's all about moving towards synthesis in the end. Okay, now with that in mind, I'm going to shift gears completely. Oh, well, one more thing I decided I wanted to share with you visually to contrast between the mystic and the practical mystic. And it'll set up the stage of what I want to really get into, and that is the magical process.